but we're thrilled to have everybody here tonight. We have an amazing panel discussion that is lined up for our active listening series, Is Pride a Privilege? This is something that's really important for us to bring together the community, to talk about the history of Pride, really what it means, look at it from a cross-generational perspective, and also the future of where our community is going. This conversation is important because not only is it Pride Month, but we are very conscious of not rainbow washing, but making sure we have valuable, interesting content. We give our platform for storytelling to share personal experiences. And at the end of this conversation, we'll be opening up the floor so that participants can ask questions to our fabulous speakers today if they would like to learn more. So I'm going to pass it over to my co-founder, Summer.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. So everybody, it's so good to see you here. First of all, I want to give a special thank you to all of these panel speakers. Thank you so much for giving us your time. And for some new friends we have here today, I want to introduce Philly very briefly. So we are Female Founders Mastermind, started in New York City. Right now, we have 80% female founders as well as 20% C-suites. And I want to give a special shout out to John, who is our longtime collaborator and our man ambassador. Thank you so much for being so supportive. And without further ado, I want to highlight our event producer as well as our head of partnership, Kate Kelly, who will introduce our moderator tonight. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Really excited to be a part of this conversation and to have the opportunity to listen and learn. I want to take this opportunity to introduce Sebastian. Sebastian Hendra is a writer, strategist, and sassy gay historian, born and raised in New York City. By day, he works at Gray Consulting, the strategy and innovation arm of iconic advertising agency Gray. By night, on the weekends, and during every other waking moment, he works on Historical Homos, the internet's first and only no fucks given guide to the LGBTQ+ history. With degrees from the University of Cambridge and Columbia, he is a self-described overeducated queen with a passion for all things queer and all things historical and hysterical. In 2018, Sebastian, with a passion for all things queer and all things, In 2018, Sebastian published Historical Homos, Volume 1, with his creative partner, co-founder, and dysfunctionally close sister, Lucy. In 2021, Historical Homos will launch into the podcast multiverse. And let's just say that's only the beginning of the queer history empire, honey. Merch, we're also doing merch. If you want to find more about Sebastian, you can find him at his socials, Instagram, Historical Homos, and historicalhomos.com. We'll drop that into the chat box. And without further ado, I give the floor to you, Sebastian. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you guys for having me. It's very exciting. I love the theme of tonight. I think it's a really powerful question. Is pride a privilege? And I think we're going to have a fascinating discussion with our panelists. I think I want to get them rolling as well, get everyone warmed up and chatting. So I'll let them introduce themselves. We have Max, Jessie, and Nick joining me tonight, and I'm also going to do a little bit of an overview of the history of Pride, just because got to work in a little historical homo history lesson before we get going into the rest of the panel. But let's start with some introductions. So Max, you're up.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me. My name is Max Kumangai. I am an actor. I live in New York City. I'm in a show called Jagged Little Pill, written by the 90s queen, Alanis Morissette. We are coming back in October. Yay, thank the Lord. But the last 9 months, I started a little sourdough delivery company called Humpday dough. And so I've been baking bread and delivering the loaves ever since.
Amazing. I cannot wait to try this gay sourdough.
It's the gayest sourdough.
Awesome. Jessie, how about you?
Awesome. Yeah. Hey, everyone. So excited to be here as well. My name is Jessie Waters. Currently in Boston, just moved here from New York. Max doesn't know this, but I'm a huge fangirl of his. So tough act to follow, but we'll talk about it after Max.
Okay.
But I grew up in the Bay Area, and I am the board president of a nonprofit called wayOUT, which partners with organizations across the US that are working to serve LGBT youth, specifically in communities where growing up as part of the LGBT community is not so easy, and where kids in those communities feel like it's not safe to be who they really are. And I grew up in a very loving family, but one that was very conservative, very religious. And so I think struggled not having a queer community around me growing up. And so that was kind of my motivation for getting involved in an organization like wayOUT. And just learning, honestly, so much from those organizations, from these queer communities, from these kids who are just so incredible. So really looking forward to being part of this discussion.
Amazing. I think I've become a little bit of a fangirl of wayOUT. I did a little bit of digging on you guys. It's an amazing sounding organization. And the gala happening in LA, the like fundraising, I mean, that is the moment. The guest list on that, I was like, damn. It
was huge. Yeah. LA did an incredible job. So we have some upcoming events in June and throughout the year that people should definitely check out too.
Okay, so if you want to be a part of the gay glitterati, you got to get in with wayOUT.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks, Jessie. And Nick.
Hey everyone, I'm Nick Norcia. I am from Georgia and Alabama. Spent my life in pretty much both states. In a really, really conservative religious upbringing, similar to Jessie, in the South, rural South, not too rural, but like pretty rural. For a New York people and LA people, it's definitely rural. But yeah, and so after I went to the University of Georgia after college, I kind of pursued something completely different than what I majored in, which I'm sure we'll get into that, how I had that like quarter life identity crisis moment as I was coming out. And yeah, I decided to move out to LA and got into the entertainment industry and have kind of been doing that since for the past 2 years. And during the pandemic, similar to Max, had to try to figure out something else to do while I become unemployed. And I got on TikTok like every other Gen Zer, and got a following on there, and people really liked my content. And I kind of just pursued that while still somewhat pursuing what I was doing before and kind of just taking it from there.
That's awesome. I love how Gen Z has established quarter life crisis as like a real thing. we all accept it now that you have to go through a crisis when you're 25 years old. But look, it's working for you, Nick. It's working for you. I was stalking you as well online, and it's absolutely hilarious. You guys should all be following Nick. Okay, well, you can see we've got a glorious roster of people to talk about Pride tonight. I just wanted to give a little history lesson on Pride, because I think it's one of the automatic things that people go to in this month, where you see tons of stuff on social media and people are like, Pride was a protest. And a lot of these slogans designed to remind us of where Pride comes from. And I think that's really important, right? Because Pride does feel a little bit more like a party than a protest a lot of the time for us nowadays. And that wasn't always the case. And I think you can even start before Pride, before the Stonewall riots and the first Pride, which was in 1970. It was called the Christopher Street Liberation Day Parade back then. And it was really born out of a period that was absolutely unlike what we live in today. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated the year before. This was the aftermath of McCarthyism, the sexual revolution. It was literally illegal to serve gay people alcohol, right? Which was that was an actual law only 50 odd years ago. And that was the occasion of, that was the catalyst actually for a pre-Stonewall action, where a bunch of guys went into a bar here in New York called Julius's and asked for a drink, and when the waiter, and told them that they were gay, and when the waiter refused to serve them, they had a newspaper photographer snap the shot, and that became known as the sip-in. And that was one of the early actions that early gay activists organized. And there were tons of movements before Stonewall. Stonewall was really a catalyst and made visible and otherwise pretty active, but under the radar movement that was advocating for gay rights. And it has to be said also, as you know, once that sort of explosive Stonewall weekend happened, which by the way was occasioned by a police raid, right? And it started to get violent when people started fighting back against police brutality. That was the whole, and so in some ways, I think we can all relate to that given the events of the past year and some of the protests that have been going on in this country. But that was really the fuel for the fire that then turned into the gay liberation movement. So it took a year for them to get organized after the riot in 1969, and June 1970 was the first gay pride parade, like I said before. But one thing I just wanted to close with is it actually became a much more fractious and fragmented movement because a lot of respectability politics started to take center stage. A lot of gay people were angry that they had to show up for all members of the community, the transvestites, the sex workers, all of these people who were actually responsible for driving a lot of the actions at Stonewall and later at some of the other responses to police brutality in other bars. And for that reason, you know, these groups split off into lots of different smaller groups. And some scholars think that really weakened the queer liberation movement overall and made it much more about gay and lesbian, typically white cisgendered people, because they were sort of responsible for leading those original organizations and pushing out some of the more marginalized communities. So to me, that's one of the ways that I think about pride being a privilege today. There is a lot of work that went into turning pride from a protest into more of a party, right? Into something that is palatable. And there's upsides and downsides to that, right? And I think that's something I'd love to hear you guys respond to. And before we even get into pride, I just wanted to hear a little bit more about your personal stories. It sounds like Jessie and Nick, you already have some crossover. That sounds really fascinating. And Max, I'd love to hear more about your background, how you came to pride. I mean, maybe you could just start by each of you guys telling me what pride means to you, or what your first, most amazing or most standout experience was with pride. Yeah. Max, why don't we start with you? We'll keep the running order.
A standout experience was definitely when I went to my first pride in San Fran. And it was basically a parade of naked people, just like in rainbows. And it was like the first time I had ever seen people be proud of who they are. You know what I mean? Yeah, that was like super formative for me and like made me like really love being gay, being a part of this community, right? Like,
was that your sort of first communal experience with the queer community?
I was older. I was 27. That was my first like gay moment. Well, pride. Yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting because and it's something I think a lot about now that, kids are kind of growing up in a different climate in terms of queerness being something that's really not so questioned and not so hidden. I'm not the oldest one here, am I? I'm 29. God, please tell me I'm not.
36.
31, 32. I
Awesome.
forget, 32.
But I feel like we grew up in that last generation where it still was very not okay to be gay, Like I was very scared of coming out, even though I had parents who were complete liberal progressives. Like my mom basically was like mad at me when I came out and was like, why did you not tell me
Why didn't
this
you tell me?
earlier?
Yeah.
And I was like, it's not about you.
Right.
But you know, that kind of hiding and it was still going on in our generation. And it's part of the reason I think, like, when I first went to Pride, I had a similar experience where I was like, this is amazing. Like, I've never experienced anything like this. I grew up in New York City and I've never been around this many gay people, you know? So it wasn't like queerness and queer culture was not something that was put front and center in my childhood. And I think Pride did really allow that to change, you know, in a day. Jessie, what about you? What was your first experience with Pride?
Yeah, thinking about my first Pride was hilarious to me. So it was also in San Francisco, Max. I was in college. I think I must have been like 21 or 22. And mind you, like I think it was over the summer. So I was living at my parents' house. And even though I was in my 20s, I probably was lying and telling my mom that I was going to go sleep over at a friend's house and snuck up to Pride. But like I showed up and I'm pretty sure I was in a cardigan. So like, I think a lot of people at Pride also thought I was like a lost tourist. And so it was this interesting thing where like, I was like, yes, I'm going to go be with my people. And then they were like, oh, my people don't know that I'm their people. And you know what I mean? And so having that experience where I think I just felt all the things that you guys felt, where how amazing, like this is such, you know, growing up 45 minutes outside of San Francisco, like I had never been a part of it like this before, because my close community, my close environment were, you know, conservative family members and a church community in so many ways. And so I think feeling like, oh, this is so liberating and so wonderful, and seeing people, you know, so happy and just embracing themselves was inspiring to me. But I don't know that I was quite there yet either, or kind of, I was still trying to figure out my own identity with it all. And so it was just interesting. I think over time, I lost the cardigan and kind of fell into my own a little bit more, but trying to identify with just the spectrum of people that show up at Pride was intimidating, but also incredible, kind of in your first experience.
Yeah, no, it's so true. It is a little intimidating, and I think, but there's also almost that comfort in anonymity in a way. You know, when you get into a huge crowd of people, and you're just like, I guess we can all just be gay together today. But I do remember feeling a similar sense of like, this is overwhelming because I didn't know this existed. And how do I find my place in all of this? I think that's a really tricky task. That's still tricky actually for young queer people. But it does feel like that visibility is sort of more every day. Like it's kind of out there in the culture and waiting to be grasped. What about you, Nick? I'm really curious to hear your response as our resident Gen Z delegate, because I just don't imagine what it's like to grow up in that slightly different climate. Although you clearly come from a very specific background.
Yeah, no, sorry to disappoint you, because I've actually never been to a Pride. Like,
oh my God, that's an answer in itself.
Well, so I came out when I was 22, and then I had like 1 year left at college, but Atlanta does their Pride in October, and I was a cheerleader at Georgia, so I couldn't go to that Pride. And then I moved out to LA after college, and I wasn't there yet in June, and then I got a job the following year, and then COVID happened. So it was like, I've yet to go to a Pride. I'm on Long Island right now, and I'm like trying to figure out if I'm going to be able to make it to New York Pride in 2 weeks. So TBD on that. But so my experience, I wouldn't even call it experience, but it's fully from the lens of social media and what I've seen on people's stories and what I've seen on people's posts of what their experience at Pride was, which just seems like a big old celebration and just happiness and, you know, alcohol and everything else. But it's just, it seems very exciting, and I can't wait to finally be a part of it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's fascinating in and of itself. I mean, like I came out when I was, I think 16. It was like, it's time, you know, I can't keep this charade up anymore. But I almost felt obligated to go to Pride like that year. Because I was like, oh, I'm gay now. This is what gay people do. I have to show up and I have to see and be seen. Not to mention the curiosity of just seeing a giant crowd of queer people. But see, I think that is like a big generational difference potentially, or micro generational difference, since we're not really from that different of a generation, but you see pride through the lens of social media, and that's informative in a lot of ways, right? I think we get a ton from social media that we didn't used to, and it's also a different kind of visibility. I was speaking about this on another event recently, that people on social media see see letters from the LGBTQIA plus community that they don't usually come into contact with. You know, my knowledge of the intersex community, for example, I'm ashamed to say, is entirely due to social media, and even, you know, some of the, you know, gender issues, I think that the queer community are not universally well versed in. Social media is hugely valuable for learning and for that kind of visibility. So it's fascinating to hear you talk about that sort of digital visibility, you know, almost as a placeholder. I do think, though, that pride as a party is something we should talk about, because that's one of the big sticking points, I think, for a lot of people. I personally think that pride being a party is kind of part of it. Is part of the point, right? We kind of want it to be a party. We want it to be a celebration. We want it to be joyous. What do you think about that, Max?
Yeah, that's what exactly. I want to celebrate the moment I decided to live truthfully. You know what I mean? And share that with people. I think that's why it's turned into something so joyous, and kind of shied away from the march aspect of it that it originally had, you know.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've heard is like it can't be a part, like we're not ready to celebrate. There's so much more work that still has to be done. And I think challenging that thought that it has to be one or the other, like I think the celebration is so necessary and also just feels really good, but it can't be everything, right? There's so much more to be done on top of just celebrating pride. Like, and I think and I know we'll get into this, you know, at some point in the conversation, but I think the challenge is when I think companies especially just feel like they check their pride box or their like ally box by having a float or, you know, having a product SKU that's rainbow. It doesn't have to just be one thing. It has to be a lot of these things. And so I think to me, it's not so much about like, should it be a party? Should it be a protest? I think it's like, yes, and, you know, we should be celebrating, but that's also not enough. We need to fight social injustices and keep fighting for all of the things that queer people do struggle with. But it doesn't have to come at the cost of celebrating.
Yeah, I think it's all, and what you just said reminded me of something, which is that, you know, the way we protest and the way we organize has also changed. Like, it's kind of a 365-day a year protest, you know, that we're engaged in. Like, and you know, organizations like wayOUT. My brother is on the board of an organization called Start Out, which helps LGBTQ plus entrepreneurs with their startups. It's like an incredible network. Like, they're going every year, you know? So like, part of the visibility and the acceptance that Pride has helped build has allowed us to organize and operate these things all year round, rather than just like 1 week a year. So if Pride has to change because of that, then I think that's okay. Yeah, and the rainbow watching, I think, is also fascinating. Like, it's now become such a common place to like see it, you know, from every single brand. I mean, I was just walking down the street today and I saw like bank after bank rainbowified, turned into like a gay club, and you're just sort of like, for what, honey? Like, what? Who's winning? Who's benefiting from that? Yeah. But I do think some other brands are like, so especially some of the younger, like, you know, more startup-y brands are wise to it. Like, I remember seeing Apple doing a thing about, or maybe it was Spotify, about promoting amplifying like queer artists in Pride Month of last year. And I was like, yes, okay, that's the moment. Like, we need to give your brand space to queer voices. That is an actual, you know, activist move, rather than just like rainbowifying the logo, you know. But I don't know. The rainbow, seeing the rainbow is better than not seeing it, in my opinion.
I absolutely agree. I last summer when I traveled, my boyfriend is from Missoula, Montana, and we went to go visit his family last summer, kind of at the height of all the protests. And I was nervous as like a Black Pacific Islander gay man to be in Montana at a time when the world seemed so polarized, right? And as soon as I got there, like I couldn't tell you how, like there were so many gay flags and Black Lives Matter flags that it became like an emblem of safety for me. Like I felt like, oh, you are recognizing the importance of showing your solidarity, you know.
Yeah.
And it's, yeah, I think it kind of turned into like a safe place to land for me.
No, that's so that I've experienced that traveling, even in my like privilege as a white, you know, I guess passing, although I don't let anybody know that I'm not gay. But you know, I've experienced that. Like I went to Russia once and I was like, this is kind of scary. Like who knows what the fuck can happen, you know? So I totally sympathize with that. And I feel like that solidarity is exactly the word. Like it's the visibility is the precursor to solidarity, you know, like you have to see it. I mean, Nick, I wonder how you think about this actually, because you are now also our resident social media expert. But there's been a lot in the past year where I feel like people were kind of complaining about a lot of, you know, these demonstrations of solidarity, virtue signaling and stuff like that. How do you feel about that? How do you think it plays into, you know, showing up?
Yeah, no, I understand the frustration, especially within the queer community, when you see these brands just throwing up the rainbow flag. And it's what, you know, a lot when we think about last year, it's like all of your white friends that just put up a black square on their Instagram. Is that all they did? Because that's just showing solidarity. Or did they go to a protest? Or did they contribute to, you know, fundraisers, things like that? And it's kind of the same thing with Pride. If you just throw up, you know, if a company especially, or just your ally friends just throw up something like that, it's like, okay, what else are you doing to help the community out? And but the one thing that a lot of people that are in the queer community, I feel, don't think about, because again, like Jessie and I don't want to completely speak for Jessie, but we come from these backgrounds of those very conservative religious upbringings. And so in my life, I know a lot of Trump supporters and people that are, I'm not saying all Trump supporters are homophobes, but a lot of homophobic people. How much it makes me so happy to know that all of the companies are putting up Pride. Because when I was younger, I distinctly remember my dad calling Home Depot, Homo Depot. And we went to Lowe's because Home Depot, back before gay marriage was legalized, contributed to, essentially they did the opposite of what Chick-fil-A does. They like would, you know, have some super PAC. And so like my dad would literally go to Lowe's because he didn't want to shop at Home Depot because it was supporting gay people. And now it's like, bitch, you got to go to Lowe's is gay friendly. Like every place is gay friendly, like showing up the thing. So it's in my head, I'm like, yes, you have no one except for Chick-fil-A. Like Chick-fil-A's your only ally. Suck on that. Anyway, so I love how like every big brand is getting behind it and being like, yeah, this is normalized, like gay, you know, gay rights or whatever. We're behind it. You know, that was, the past was history type of a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, I think you made the point, Sebastian, of like, it's a conversation starter, or the visibility is so important. I don't know if anybody's a big soccer fan, but the women's national team had like their numbers on their jerseys are rainbow, you know, in support of Pride Month. And like, I just have these beautiful ideas of like some young girl or young little boy in like a very red state being like, Mom or Dad, why are there rainbow colors on their jerseys? And just like the fact that those conversations are happening, even if the answers aren't great, you know what I mean? I feel like it's so important to just have things like that be conversation starters that can lead to more education, that can lead to these conversations. Hopefully there's not like a Homo Depot of the United States soccer team, but like just facilitating conversations, I feel like is so important, and just creating those questions for youth today who just are curious, you know, and want to learn more.
Yeah. I hate that Homo Depot makes me laugh, but it does get me.
Have we reclaimed Homo Depot? Because I call it that because I'm so proud to like actually use a power tool that I got from Home Depot and put up this damn shelf. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm gay. Like,
it's decided. Homo Depot is reclaimed as of today.
Yes.
No, but I mean, even in just the difference between the way I was talking about it and the way you were talking about it, Nick, you can see how like it is almost, I am coming at it from a kind of privileged like New York point of view, you know, where I walk past the bank with the rainbow flag and I'm like, who's that helping? But in like rural America or in Trump, you know, supporting America, which by the way is in all sorts of all different regions we know around America. It's not just in certain regions. That does mean something very powerful, very different, you know? It does force a conversation. And I love what your point around forcing other brands to like behave, you know? I guess the question is then though, like, do we think that it's actually, that could always go away, you know? Like it feels like if you're not taking real action, if you're not taking something that's, you know, costing you money or putting your brand on the line, then it's kind of easy, and it's kind of easy to let slip if the culture should change, for example, as it did, you know, politically in the past regime. I mean, one of the things that I have seen a lot of, and especially in the last year, is workplaces like really stepping up and changing. I'm actually, Max, I really want to hear about how this happens on Broadway and in that community. But in the advertising world, like after this past year where Black Lives Matter became, you know, absolutely unavoidable as an issue for leaders in advertising, which is predominantly a white industry, there's a completely different attitude to D&I, to diversity and inclusion now in our industry. It's not just, you know, a sideline thing. It's not a separate tiny budget that someone has to take care of within the office building. You know, it's like a serious rubric for how you organize a business. And like the leaders in my business are making us refresh our trainings and, you know, keep us engaged. So I'm just curious how Pride has showed up for you guys in the workplace, or even just queerness and how you've dealt with that. Because I think that's a really that's really relevant to how we think about Pride as a privilege, you know. So Max, why don't you give us I'm really curious about how it works on Broadway, which must be one of the most gay-friendly.
It absolutely is a gay-friendly institution. But I would say, like, before this movement, this last summer, there wasn't any sort of like outlet within a company that kind of gave opportunities of inclusion, like within the company. We actually, as Jag Little Pill is, we got an email from our producers saying, you know, we are going to come back and stronger than we were before, and we're going to include some diversity and inclusion trainings, seminars for the entire company, which I don't think has ever happened in a Broadway show. It's like, I think the producers are just worried about getting the show up and getting the people in the seats, and that's about it when it comes to like HR within the company. And I think like the whole community or the whole Broadway, you know, all of the shows are kind of having to like rethink how they approach their inclusion training and diversity trainings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating. Like it's the exact same then as some of these other big industries. What about you, Jessie? Because I remember you said you worked in tech, right?
Yep. So yeah, I mean, my experience in the workplace has always been insanely supportive. I've worked for, you know, companies where I've always felt safe being out. You know, predominantly I've worked in tech, I've worked in cities like San Francisco and New York. And so it's been like, there's just like interesting undercurrents that go on. Like I remember earlier in my career, like because I was a lesbian, somehow I made it into like the boys club that was tech. And so like navigating those types of circumstances was just like interesting that I didn't really know how to earlier on in my career. And I think now, like I said, I think there's the visibility of Pride and the fact that people are paying attention and are engaged and are asking questions and all of that stuff that comes with it, I think is wonderful and crucial. But I think, Nick, to your point, it's like, but what else are you doing, right? Like my partner works at Bank of America, one of the banks that you probably walked by, Sebastian, that is a club now. And it wasn't too long ago where like employees had to fight to change like paternity leave and to change language in their insurance policies to account for same-sex couples, because two women that were trying to go adopt or were trying to go on, maternity leave didn't have the same rights. And so I think there's just so many instances like that. Actually, another one I was thinking about not too long ago was, and this happened a couple of months ago. We were at an all hands, we did like a company all hands, and people can submit questions in Q&A. And at a very liberal forward tech company in New York City, somebody asked a question that was like publicly put on screen in front of the entire company that said, I know that we lean pretty liberal, but I want to make sure that I, as somebody who's more conservative, who believes in two genders, like pause, like that was written on a screen. And like the problem to me isn't so much the fact that like somebody thought that and thought it was okay to ask at a company, but like a handful of other leaders at the company saw that question and didn't say, hey, this really isn't appropriate. We have people at the company that don't identify as man or women, and this question pretty much invalidates their existence. And so it's just, even working at companies that I think I can feel really safe to be who I am and be out, there's still, these small little, or not so small, there's still these areas that people just don't know that they say things that can be really hurtful. And so I think, again, to me, it just comes back to like Pride is great. And it's great that companies are supportive and that all the workspaces that I've been at have been nothing but really respectful to me and supportive. But there's so much more that has to be done, whether it's just thinking about insurance policies and insurance coverage, or like policies just to account for same-sex parents, or things like raising your hand and saying, hey, this question really isn't appropriate. And this is really hurtful to people. So there's still a lot that I think we have to do. And luckily Pride starts the conversation, but it just can't end there.
Yes. No, I love that point. And I mean, it almost feels to me like previously it felt like there were sort of LGBT networks and stuff like that in businesses. And, it was kind of down to the people on a business by business basis to put their best foot forward and be like, this is what we have to advocate for. This is what people care about. This is what we need to change. But now the pressure is kind of coming from outside a bit more, right? Like the culture is actually pushing businesses to do this. So I feel like it does relieve actually gay people at work from some of that work that they have to do. I mean, the pronouns shift to me has really taken off in the past 2 years. Like I see that in almost every email signature. I see it on LinkedIn. And still, like, I have conversations with people in my business who are maybe 20 years older or something, and they don't get it, they don't understand it, and it needs to be explained to them. And that's the kind of work that I think that we still have to do. We still, it's kind of like how people said, you have to go home to your Trump supporting family and try to have difficult conversations with them last year. That's kind of work that we still have to do, but at least the culture is pushing them so much more now than they used to. Nick, what about you? I'm curious to hear what it's like. I mean, entertainment is another famously gay-friendly industry, but actually, I don't know. I wonder if it's what your experience has been like.
Yeah, so post-college, I've only worked on film and TV sets, which is more like gig work. So it doesn't really have that. And I had a finance degree and I had like a finance internship. So I kind of got a taste of corporate America. But not during like Pride or anything, so I had no experience to talk about there. But it's a totally different feel. It's not like, it's essentially for 3 months you have this job and then it's over. So there's not as much as a like, how do you feel about, like, do you feel welcome? Like there's no conversation, there's no HR department, right? So that could be problematic. But because entertainment is super creative and there's like gays everywhere in entertainment, I always felt very welcoming. Like I've never worked on a show where one of the producers wasn't an openly gay person. And so I've always felt comfortable on sets. From like my, not necessarily upbringing, but just out of habit, I'm always kind of reserved when I first like meet people, you know? So like a lot of times it's not until like month 2, people are like, wait, you're gay? And I'm like, yeah. But that's just kind of just more of what I'm used to. That's just kind of up to me. But because I'm not like, hey, I'm gay. So, but anyway, yeah. So I've had great experiences on film sets with the whole culture, and it's just different. It's not like a corporate America.
What if it was like an addendum to like the pronouns, like, hey, my name's Max, I use he, him, and I'm gay, like, and then we start the conversation. Like, what if we normalize that? That would be amazing.
Yeah, no, you get it over with. Well, because the last film I was actually working on, I was the second, and the first AD didn't know till like the last week, and he was talking. Anyway, it was like kind of this awkward moment where he's like, "Wait a second, you're gay?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Oh," and he's like, "Have I said anything to offend you?" I was like, "No, you're fine." He's like, "Okay, just tip," because a lot of times people that are around gay people, they always straight people want to make sure that they don't say anything problematic. But like, it's kind of like a Trojan horse where like they don't know that I'm gay, and they're like, oh, "Wait, have I said anything?" Shit, I'm like, no, you didn't. You're off the hook. You're good.
Yeah, I actually also, Jessie, something that you said about being lumped in with the boys club because you're a lesbian. Like, I experienced something similar when when I was working in London, and like I had a gay boss, so automatically like. And it was true that there did seem to be a lot of young men running around at the sort of junior level. But there was this sort of like narrative that like, because we had a gay boss, he was privileging us and hiring gay people. Meanwhile, I was the only other gay person in the office. But it was almost this thing of like, oh, if you're out at work, like you must all be working together, like behind the scenes, a cabal of queers. And I was speaking about that with someone who is, maybe 10 years older. And she was like, how fortunate that you had a queer boss, and like you had someone who was out and who was, proud and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, how fortunate, but it didn't really do me any favors because everyone thought I was like the teacher's pet just for being gay. Right. But I've been very fortunate. I mean, it's probably similar to you, Nick, in the sense that like advertising is extremely rife with queer people. So it's just never been an issue. I, however, love to tell people that I'm gay from the get-go, just to see what happens to their facial arrangement. But that's a personal preference. I mean, there is a difference, I think, with gender identity, because with gender identity, it's part of the reason I think we all have to be out there with our pronouns is because people don't take it seriously, like people, whereas with sexuality, that's almost kind of the privileged place we've gotten to, where it's like, it is less of a big deal in these industries that we're working in and typically urban areas and stuff like that. But also it's illegal to discriminate against people. Though that's only, we have a young joiner. Though that law is only like a year old or something, that it became illegal to discriminate based on gender identity and sexual orientation, which is crazy. It's my privilege for not even knowing that wasn't even a law. You know what I mean? But yeah, I think how pride shows up at work is it can sometimes almost feel like a distraction from a lot of the core issues that, because everybody wants to have a party and everybody wants to have a nice time. I saw a couple of companies doing a lot of stuff around history last year because that was the 50th anniversary of the first Pride March. And I thought that was like a great change, that's like more of an activist move, I think. Actually, speaking of that's something I wanted to talk about is sort of like the future of Pride and where you guys see it going. Like, do you think it's changed in recent years? I mean, I feel like COVID actually has accelerated a lot of the social media stuff because we were all sat at home, like with nothing to do but go on social media and try to be activists from our couches. But how do you think Pride is changing? Like, and how do you think it needs to change? I think I'll kick us off. I think one really important thing that we were sort of alluding to earlier is Pride doesn't feel like it only happens in 1 month, like of the year. Like I really feel like it's becoming way more spread out, and people are activists, people are partying, people are learning, people are seeing our stories in media, for example, every other week. Like Netflix and Amazon and Hulu are coming out with a new queer narrative for us to binge on every month. It just doesn't feel like it's the same sort of calendar. That's one way. That's one fundamental way I feel like Pride is changing and will continue to change. Is we're kind of celebrating Pride every day, or at least we should be. Here's a better way to ask this question: when's a time that Pride has disappointed you, if ever?
I don't know that I've ever quite felt disappointed by Pride. Like, I think it's hard because I think the time box gives it the attention. And you're like, okay, I get, like, if I have to give my energy to Pride, like in the same way that we've been doing it for this month all year round, like I'm not going to make it. Like, I just don't have that kind of energy. But I think to address your kind of the first way that you framed this, Sebastian, I think just getting more creative with what we're doing to honor Pride. And I think I was actually working at Spotify when we did the campaign that was like highlighting queer artists. And I work at a company now that is very much in film, and Nick, you can probably attest to this to some degree. Actually, we all probably can, like highlighting queer filmmakers and queer producers, and just like, I think using it to give a platform. So that's how I kind of see it evolving and I think this is true of a lot of other movements. It's just a time to recognize and give queer voices that maybe wouldn't be recognized at other times of the year, just that platform, and really just that conversation starter. But the other thing I've said this multiple times now, like I think the thing that has to happen is like, it can't just be a checkbox for people. Like it can't just be, well, we did that, we'll think about it again next year. It has to be like, if you're a company, how do you think about your queer employees and how do you make sure that they are protected, and not just like, oh yeah, it's okay to be gay at this company, but really with the policies that you have in place, like how do you make sure that because that's something that like actually changes your life every single day, right? And so I'm thinking about how do we make Pride something that's long lasting, even if you're not celebrating all throughout the year, which obviously all of us are, but how are you implementing things that is going to have a lasting impact on queer people, whether it's your company or whether it's just the community that you're in?
Yeah.
And Jessie, you said earlier about having it start so young, like having conversations with the youth. And I think like, if the little gay boy, Max, in 4th grade was like opened up their sex education book called Family Life, because I went to Catholic school, and I saw 2 men like as like a potential like relationship, I would have totally saved so many years of like shame and like trying to hide, right? Like just by seeing it. So I feel like it's exactly what you said. Like we need to like our kids being educated on Pride, like itself. Like, are they doing that? Are they doing it now, or because they weren't doing that when I was younger?
Yeah.
No,
that's such an important point, and it makes me think also like it's sort of like Pride needs to show up for different target audiences, in different ways. Like it doesn't, to speak in my marketing babble, but like it can't just all be like a party all the time. It can't all be a parade. It can't all be a protest, actually, always. Sometimes it needs to be education, sometimes it needs to be listening, like what, the guys at Feely are doing today. And sometimes it'll show up in different media in different way. I mean, Nick, from your perspective, how do you think Pride is changing or should change?
Yeah, funny you bring up education, because one thing I was going to say is, from my, again, never been to a Pride festival, but from my understanding of Pride, it is a bunch of ripped white guys on a float, and it's also a ton of drinking and sex and all that stuff. So it's like, it's not the most inclusive from, again, a bird's eye view. And so I'm like, well, what about, Max, your point, like, what's pride for a 10-year-old that, you know, everyone's different. Every gay person I know, some people are like, I didn't know I was gay until 18. Like, I knew I was gay before I even went through puberty. So before I was even attracted to men, I knew I was gay. So like, again, if I was 8 and what pride would mean for me, and there kind of needs, I'm not saying there needs to be we need to stop, you know, the drinking and all that stuff and make it kid friendly. But I'm just saying, I feel like it does need to just be a little bit more mindful that, you know, there's people that don't drink. There's people that are monogamous. There's people that are, you know, there's children, stuff like that. So just being mindful of that.
No, I think that's an excellent point. I mean, we're probably too late into it to crack this one open, but I do think there's a huge issue with the fact that, like, a lot of this is about sex. A lot of it is about sexuality, you know, and people don't think that that's a suitable material for everyone in society. So there's a deeper question there, actually, about how you deal with that for kids that I am absolutely not qualified to comment on. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's really important, and I completely agree with you, Max, that it literally changes your life when you see it. I mean, my first experience with like a gay couple in front of me was Will and Grace, and half the time they were just making fun of them, you know, like it wasn't like a
straight actor.
Right. And I think it wasn't even until like 9 seasons in that they actually kissed each other on the mouth on screen, or that, you know, like that was like gay culture light, even though it is one of the funniest shows ever written. I stand by it forever. But you know, that visibility really wasn't there in our generation. I didn't learn anything about gay sex in sex ed. In fact, the only experience I had in high school was an HIV positive guy coming in to give us a lecture on living with AIDS, which scared the shit out of me more than, you know, wanting to learn more, really. And it just boggles my mind, actually, thinking about it now, how few resources there are, even in New York City, you know, where the literal home of Pride. So I think that's a huge point. And it's not just children, of course, like it's also showing up for other people who don't necessarily need to come to a party or a parade, you know? And if we don't do that work, then we're not really doing the full work of Pride. Mm-hmm. All right, I think I'm kind of out of questions. Anyone else have any amazing killer thoughts that they wanted to end on? Silence. I think we've covered a lot. I'm feeling hot.
Yeah, no, I think this was great. I think doing more of these, honestly, like, I feel like there are Pride panelists with, like, I mean, you guys are all absolutely stars, but you know what I mean? Like, more discussions like this with people where you're just kind of talking about experiences and highlighting those things. I think making that more a part of like our Pride celebrations, obviously, again, in addition to everything else that we currently do, is so important, and I think so empowering. And I think it's easy to assume that these conversations are like happening in everyday life, but they're really not, or at least not in platforms like this.
Yeah. Actually, you know, one thing it does make me think of, sorry to break open another thing, but that representation question, I think, is so different now than it used to be. I feel like I only like covered half of the thing in talking about Will and Grace. Like I don't know if you guys saw that movie I Care a Lot on Netflix. It's with Rosamund Pike, and she's playing this like absolute psycho devil human being who like cheats old people out of all of their savings. But it was a really interesting movie because she's very explicitly queer, and her partner in it is also her partner in crime, and they kind of have this like sick, twisted love story that's going on at the same time as they're cheating all of these poor old people out of their fortunes. But I thought that was like such an interesting sign of the times, that like the queerness was not centered at all, but it was just something that was kind of like part of the narrative that we kind of, you know, we get to consume with.
Uh-oh.
Happiest Season with Kristen Stewart.
Wait,
Sebastian, we lost you for like 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying, so I was talking about that movie, I Care a Lot, but tell me you saw this movie, The Happiest Season, with Kristen Stewart. Did you see that? Did you guys see that?
I obviously did, but.
That movie, to me, I was watching it and I was just like, this is the most toxic display of homosexuality I've ever seen in my life. Like, obviously we all want to see Kristen Stewart at her gayest self, but like, this was just horrendous. And it was like, well, what did you think of it? I want to hear what you thought.
It was so frustrating because you see the trail. Well, you see like 5 seconds. You see the title of the movie and like you get an idea of what's it about. And you're like, how great. Like they're featuring like a lesbian couple in a holiday movie. This is everything I've been waiting for. And then you watch it and it's just like stereotype after stereotype after stereotype. And you're just kind of like, miss the mark a little bit. Yeah, so it's, I mean, I feel like every single person that I talk to about it, they're like, yeah, of course we watched it. We hated it, but like, of course we're supportive. You know what I mean? Yeah. But yeah, it was frustrating because I think, and part of me wonders like, is that what they had? Are those the rules they had to play by, like to get this movie produced? Or like, was that intentional or like, was it something else? So yeah, it was a lot of things.
It just was so dated, you know? It was like, we've seen this narrative a million times before and like, it does not. Also, in what world would Kristen Stewart, hottest girl ever, stay with that girl who was like lying to her family about who she was? Like, please. I know,
she should have been out much sooner.
It was not believable. It did not work. But yeah, I do think it's changing. Movie? What?
Was it a Hallmark movie?
It felt like one.
Oh, yeah, you would think it was.
The trailer made it look like one, but it was exactly that kind of thing of like, you know, moral of the story kind of thing. Although there wasn't even a moral. Anyway, that kind of representation question I think is really important, and it is changing a lot. Like someone was just saying in the chat that there's a study being done on like queer cartoon characters for children, right? And like how you build those narratives in. So that they do exactly what you were saying before, Max, like giving people that narrative or at least some exposure to something that otherwise they don't really get at school. And that even their liberal parents might not be, you know, giving to them. It's sort of the mainstreamification of queer culture that some people are mad about, I think, in the queer community, but I think it does more good than harm. Sorry, what were you going to say, Max?
Did any of you think like the villains in all the Disney movies were queer?
Yes.
I grew up thinking that from jump.
Them all. I'm like, why do I love the bad guy? Are we
like Scar is a homo?
Also, the live action did not do him justice. The animated Scar is the Scar.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. So good.
Also, I love how Scar like kind of looks exactly like Jafar. Like
they are the same face.
It's the exact same like queer British man that I really want to go party with. Not to mention Ursula.
Drag queen.
Yeah, for sure.
Like major queer vibes. No, I know that's such a thing. But also, why are they always the villain?
Right.
Yeah, we gotta have a chat with Disney.
Well, no,
Disney.
You're demonizing gayness.
But
right?
now
you're making us want toxic. That's the reason gays are so toxic.
That's it. Disney.
Ursula the Sea Witch is why I'm in a toxic relationship. No, but you know, Disney is now doing like the exact opposite. Like every time they come out with something, they're like Disney's first LGBT superhero or Disney's first, and it's like, how many firsts can we have, honey?
Yeah,
right.
Literally.
Okay, wait, we got a question from the audience. Do you know of any specific resources for the young queer community who come out and are not supported by their family and need help? Ooh, Jessie, this sounds like you might be able to field this question.
Not to plug wayOUT, but if you go to wayOUT.lgbt, we work with a ton of organizations that have so many resources. So that's a good hub to kind of start with. And then you should be able to find stuff, but also reach out to any one of us from wayOUT, depending on where the person is asking this question. We can maybe point them to a local resource.
Plugging that link in the chat.
I know in the South, not to like, so basically in my experience, I know that Methodist churches and Lutheran churches are all LGBTQIA like accepting, at least the United Methodist Church. And so I know that they typically will either be a resource or they know of resources, because in the South, I actually spent a lot of time in Natchez, Mississippi, and there is an organization called Y'all Means All, which is very similar to wayOUT, in the sense of it's just trying to make sure that young people that are ostracized by their family have resources, and they partner with the Methodist Church, and like Methodist Church a lot of times gets the kids, because when you're in trouble, you go to a church. That's like kind of what we were raised to do. And they like essentially give the kid over to Y'all Means All. Anyway, so I know like if you're in especially a rural conservative Christian area, United Methodist churches are good.
Yeah, In Circle is another great organization. They're based out of Provo, Utah. We partnered with that. If you just Google In Circle, you will find so much insane content. Some of which just will make you cry, but some of which is really useful just for navigating tough conversations, family dynamics, etc. So that's another good one to plug.
Amazing. Any other questions from our listeners for any of the speakers, or general questions?
Nick, I have a question for you, and everybody don't be shy. If you have questions, you can drop them in the chat box, or you can take yourself on camera and unmute yourself and ask them yourself. But Nick, I know so much about your story, and it's just so incredible and inspiring. And if you would feel comfortable to share some ways that you stayed positive and resilient in your personal experience when maybe you didn't have the support that you had hoped for or wanted from your own family and community, and how you found that light to keep shining for other people and be such an inspiration for this entire community.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to share. So no surprise with my Homo Depot story. My dad is not one of very shine favor upon homosexuals. So when he found out that his son was a homosexual, he did not handle that very well. And my mom had passed away of cancer when I was 17. I came out when I was 22, so I really only had him and my stepmom and my siblings. But so I was completely ostracized by my family, and like have not gone home. I came out like 3 days after Christmas and was told that was my last Christmas there. Showed up 2 years later just to wish my siblings Merry Christmas, and wasn't even invited inside the house on Christmas Day. Grandparents didn't even come out to say hi. So anyway, but one of the reasons why I say positive, and it didn't really get to me, was because, well, one, I kind of realized I was always kind of a happy person, and I was like, if I let my circumstances change me, then my dad wins, or the hate wins. And I was like, no, I'm going to let this just make me a better person, a stronger person. Because when I lost my mom, it was totally different. But I realized, even though I miss her tremendously, losing my mom made me so much of a stronger person emotionally, and gave me a bigger capacity to love. And so kind of losing my dad and family, I kind of was able to really see how important it is to be authentic, and how happy I genuinely was. Because when you're growing up, and you have so much self-hate, and you're trying to be someone for someone else. Like I always wanted to make my dad proud. I wanted to be the son he wanted. I played baseball, I played football. I never did musical theater. I never did an arts, like never really pursued the arts. That's what I wanted to do. And so once I was 22, I was absolutely miserable, had these horrible thoughts, finally came out, except I was so overwhelmed with joy. And that's, again, one of the reasons why Pride's such a happy place, because it's like people that had a lot of self-hate, and a lot of them have thought self-harm thoughts, and some of them unfortunately went through with it. It's like you come on the other side of the closet, and it's just the happiest place. And just the support you get through the community, and not just the gay community, just humans in general. I think the human experience, it's just, you know, I have a lot of trust in humanity in the sense of like a good human sees another human down, they pick them up. And I think holistically or blanket statement that typically happens. And so, yeah, so I just felt super, like that first Christmas without my family, I was invited to like 10 different Christmases. People were like, we're flying you here. Oh no, Nick, come to my house. Like, come to my, it was like, I was overwhelmed with love and support. And that just meant like the world to me.
That's amazing.
That was amazing.
I feel like I'm gonna cry.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing that. That just made me think differently about privilege entirely. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
I see that John had a question for Max.
Oh, Lord.
Such a cute question.
Is sourdough gay? If not, what is the gayest bread? And why did you choose sourdough as the focus of your character? Oh, John. Sourdough is gay and straight. It's non-binary, really. It's everything and nothing and just two ingredients, all in the same thing. I love you.
Don't you like start with something called like the mother or something?
Yes, hun.
I feel like that reminds me of like drag mothers.
So,
Every sourdough has a drag mother.
Yeah. This is the sourdough starter. It starts there this morning and it like expands, and then I have to like discard it and feed it again. It's like a chia pet.
That is cool.
Or a Tamagotchi.
Oh my God, you're dating yourself, Max.
I am. Oh my God. Do you guys, Nick, do you know what a Tamagotchi is?
Oh my God, I am
Oh
old.
no.
Like they were like mini chain, like keychain, like
It was like a little pet.
Like a pet, like an electronic pet.
but digital.
I feel like we're so past Tamagotchis where like you should have experienced it making like an ironic comeback by now.
Yes, right. They should be sold at Urban Outfitters, but they're not.
Wow, that is life-changing to meet someone who doesn't know what a Tamagotchi is.
You're not missing out on anything, but
it's so funny. A lot of my friends in LA, they're about 10 years older than me. And when I said something about Jersey Shore being like the first reality TV show, and they were like, shut up, like the real world. And I was like, the what? And they literally lost their mind. They hated me. They're like, get out of it. Who invited him? Who invited Nick to this party?
Well, you're wise beyond your years, Nick.
Well, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from the crowd? All right. I'm just going to say thank you because it was such a privilege to talk to you guys today and hear your perspective, to hear your stories. Thank you so much. This was so fun.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Yeah, all of the speakers. And if you can do us a favor, I'm pretty sure all of the audience would love to follow you and stalk you on your social media platform. So Sebastian, Max, Nick, please feel free to drop your social media links. And Jessi, I know your Instagram is private, but feel free to leave any like contact information or LinkedIn if you feel comfortable. Or we maybe wayOUT Instagram if that is.
I'll add wayOUT. wayOUT is way more interesting than my personal one, so I'll leave you out with that one.
Cool. And everybody, we're just so grateful for your time. And again, we launched the active listening, this event series to the public since the Black Lives Matters movement last summer. And we decided to be very determined and committed to it. So we didn't only do it once, we did it every month. And for Pride, we also did during the coming out months last year. So we're just very grateful, very dedicated to all of the important social injustice issues. So glad to have you. And if you are interested in checking out Philly, what we do, who we are, and please feel free to join us for the future events. And I will pass it to my co-founder, Jacqueline.
Thank you, everyone. This was such an incredible conversation. We appreciate all of you so much. Thank you for sharing your personal stories, your experiences, amazing ways for people to get involved and change perspectives on what we can do to actively participate in Pride, not only as an ally, but an advocate for the queer community. So thank you all so much. Wishing you an amazing night, and we look forward to staying in touch with each one of you.
Thank you. Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody.